Imagine a world where silence isn't emptiness, but clarity, where solitude isn't loneliness, but a form of self-preservation. Picture a mind so finely tuned to the chaos of the world that even the lightest small talk feels like a storm pressing against its walls. Why is it that so many of history's most brilliant thinkers, inventors, artists, and philosophers seem to choose the quiet path, not out of shyness, but because the noise of ordinary life feels unbearable? And what was Arthur Schopenhauer really trying to tell us when he insisted that solitude was not just a preference, but a necessity for certain kinds of minds? Today, we're going to walk through this unsettling but liberating idea that for many intelligent people, social life is not just inconvenient, it's exhausting, even suffocating. We'll step inside Schopenhauer's mind and uncover how his radical thoughts illuminate the connection between intelligence, solitude, and inner freedom. And by the end, you may see your own need for space and silence in an entirely new way, one that not only explains your instincts, but validates them. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this with someone who understands the value of deep thought, and drop a comment below. Do you feel more alive in a crowd or alone in a quiet room? Your answer might reveal more about your mind than you think, and stay until the end, because the final insight might just shock you. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, wasn't just famous for his bleak view of human nature. He was a master at cutting through the illusions of society, exposing truths most people would rather not face. For him, intelligence was not about grades or cleverness, it was about perception. It was the rare ability to see reality as it is, without the comforting filters most people live behind. And this, ironically, is both a gift and a curse. The more clearly you see the world, the more you begin to notice its cracks. The hollowness of small talk, the self-serving motives hidden behind politeness, the subtle cruelty woven into social expectations. Schopenhauer once wrote, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." What he meant was simple but profound. The deeper your mind, the more questions you ask, and the more those questions disrupt the illusion of simplicity. And once you start asking real questions, shallow answers no longer satisfy you. That's why for highly intelligent people, the rituals of casual conversation, gossip, surface-level chatter, polite performance, feel like sand in the gears of their mind. Not because they look down on others, but because their hunger is for depth, truth, and authenticity. Think about it. When was the last time you were in a group and felt truly understood? If you have a deep mind, you probably know the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people yet mentally drifting elsewhere. You nod, you smile, you participate, but your inner world is quietly waiting for you to return. Schopenhauer believed that solitude is not withdrawal, it's restoration. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, he wrote, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. This isn't arrogance, it's self-preservation. For a sensitive mind, social life often means carrying the emotional baggage of others, absorbing their moods, expectations, and energy until your own thoughts feel drowned out. The mind, Schopenhauer argued, is like a fine instrument. It produces its best music in stillness, but is easily overwhelmed by noise. For the highly intelligent, too much social exposure can feel like being constantly out of tune. Even when they do attend gatherings, such individuals often retreat inward. They're watching patterns, readings, between lines, or quietly waiting for the moment they can step back into their own space. This isn't misanthropy. It's misalignment. The depth they long for rarely matches the surface-level exchanges society thrives on. And here's the harsh truth. The modern social world is built to reward the loud, not the wise. It celebrates quick opinions over slow reflection, conformity over originality, distraction over contemplation. Schopenhauer understood that most social interactions are performances, roles we're expected to play, and for the thinker, this stage is exhausting. Carl Jung, decades later, echoed this sentiment. He observed that the more inwardly focused a person becomes, the less they tolerate what he called the collective noise. For both Jung and Schopenhauer, the richest experiences were found in the inner life, not in constant external engagement. So here's the real question. How much of your social life is something you genuinely enjoy, and how much is something you simply endure? How often do you say yes to an event, only to find yourself wishing you could leave halfway through? If you felt that, it's not necessarily a flaw in you. It may be a clue, a sign that your mind works in a way the world doesn't fully understand. And by the end of this exploration, you might not just understand why solitude feels so vital. You might realize that, for certain minds, it's the only space where real freedom exists. Not because the people were unkind, but because your mind was hungering for something else: quiet, books, ideas, music, reflection. That's not weakness, that's awareness. Schopenhauer warned that constant socializing dilutes the self. He believed that excessive company drags us away from our essence, crowding our minds with the noise of other people's thoughts, desires, and distractions. To live authentically, he argued, one must cultivate what he called voluntary solitude. Not loneliness imposed by rejection, but solitude chosen for its richness. In a world where being social is often equated with being healthy, this might sound radical. But is it really? Modern research keeps proving what Schopenhauer intuited 2 centuries ago. Highly intelligent people often report lower life satisfaction when they're pressured to match the average person's level of social activity. They don't thrive in constant connection. They thrive in selective depth. So when people tell you you're too quiet, too solitary, or that you should get out more, perhaps the real question isn't why you're alone, but what kind of connection they're offering. Does it nourish you or drain you? Schopenhauer's point was not the bitter complaint of a misanthropic philosopher. It was an observation of a timeless pattern. Across history and across cultures, the greatest minds, Socrates, Leonardo da Vinci, Newton, Nikola Tesla, were not known for working the room. They were seekers of silence, both by nature and by necessity. Why? Because solitude gives space, physical and mental. It's in that space that thoughts can stretch, ideas can bloom, and consciousness can deepen. Intelligent individuals don't fear silence, they welcome it. For them, silence isn't a void. It's a canvas. Schopenhauer believed that most people are driven by what he called the will to live, a blind, ceaseless urge for survival, pleasure, distraction, and reproduction. Most social life, he argued, orbits around satisfying these instincts without ever questioning them. But the truly intelligent don't live on autopilot. They analyze, they reflect, they challenge the rules. They're not content with simply existing. They want to understand why they exist and how to live in alignment with something deeper. And that kind of questioning? It's rarely encouraged in casual conversation. In fact, it's often subtly discouraged. If you have a deep mind, you know the feeling, walking away from a conversation feeling hungrier for meaning than when it began. That's the ache of an intelligent mind, starving for depth. Schopenhauer warned that this hunger can't be fed in crowded rooms. It must be fed in the quiet of books, the rhythm of a long walk, the stillness of music, the reflection of solitude. He believed that a mind constantly pulled into shallow social noise loses its ability to think with philosophical depth. And here, modern psychology meets him halfway. Studies from Yale and the London School of Economics show that people with higher intelligence often have a lower desire for frequent social interaction, not because they dislike others, but because their need for stimulation is already met internally. Their imagination, curiosity, and inner dialogue are richer than most external exchanges could offer. Carl Jung saw the same truth. The introverted intuitive type, which strongly overlaps with high intelligence, doesn't seek quantity in relationships. They seek quality. They'd rather have 2 hours of deep conversation with one person than 2 hours mingling with 20. And when they can't find that depth, they don't force it. They withdraw, not in bitterness, but in self-preservation. This is the part people misunderstand. Intelligent solitude is not rejection of others, it's alignment with the self. The environments that nourish this alignment are often slow, quiet, and reflective. Libraries, gardens, creative studios, or simply a silent room. These are the sacred spaces of the intelligent. In them, the mind is free to wander, to question, to build connections invisible in the glare of constant social activity. And yet, society pathologizes this preference. We're told extroversion is healthy, that sociability equals success, that being alone is somehow suspicious. But is it unhealthy, or is it simply different and deeply misunderstood? Schopenhauer flipped the script. Schopenhauer turned this idea on its head. He believed that the more a person depends on external stimulation to feel content, the emptier their inner world likely is. In his words, ordinary people merely think how they shall spend their time. A man of talent tries to use it. Intelligent individuals do not fear boredom. They transcend it. They are not chasing entertainment. They are seeking meaning. And meaning is not handed to you at a party, in a crowd, or in the noise of constant activity. It's something uncovered alone, often painfully, but always profoundly. This doesn't mean intelligent people reject relationships. Quite the opposite. But the connections they form tend to be fewer, deeper, and far more intense. They seek out those rare souls who challenge their thinking, who aren't afraid of silence, who question the unquestioned. They bond over shared depth, not shared noise. And here lies the danger of shallow relationships. Schopenhauer warned that mediocrity craves company. The average gravitates toward the average. For an intelligent person, blending into a group purely out of conformity can become toxic, not because the group is malicious, but because it can slowly pull them away from their deeper path. Have you ever caught yourself dumbing down your words just to be understood? Or holding back your real thoughts because you knew they'd be mocked, ignored, or misunderstood? That's the quiet tension Schopenhauer described. To preserve their inner richness, the intelligent must be willing to walk alone. And that walk, though lonely, leads to a kind of clarity no crowd can offer. Friedrich Nietzsche, deeply influenced by Schopenhauer, expanded on this truth. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. Society, for all its benefits, exerts a constant pressure to blend in, to mirror others, to belong at any cost. But for the intelligent, belonging that requires self-betrayal is far too high a price. They would rather be misunderstood than insincere. They would rather be alone than diluted. This doesn't mean hey, never feel loneliness. Of course they do. But even in loneliness, there's a certain honesty. In the quiet, there's room for self-inquiry, for creation, for truth. Sometimes that is far more nourishing than the company of those who don't truly see you. Which brings us to a question worth asking. Is your solitude a sign of sadness or sovereignty? When you choose to be alone, not out of rejection but out of alignment, you're practicing a form of philosophical integrity. You are saying, I value my mind, I value my peace, I value depth over distraction. And perhaps, like Schopenhauer, you've realized that true companionship is rare, and until it arrives, your own company is enough. Here's where the paradox begins. While the intelligent often avoid the social world, they also carry a deep yearning for connection, just not the kind most people offer. What they crave isn't casual, it's sacred. Behind their silence is a longing, not for crowds, but for kindred spirits, not for popularity, but for understanding. They may go days without speaking to anyone, yet carry a quiet ache to be seen, not for their performance, but for their essence. This type of connection is rare beyond measure, which is why intelligent people often spend so much time alone, not because they dislike humanity, but because shallow company makes them feel even more isolated. Studies in psychology and neuroscience confirm this. Intelligent individuals tend to process relationships differently. They are more sensitive to emotional nuance, more alert to inconsistencies in behavior, and more deeply affected by inauthenticity. What others experience as harmless small talk can leave them feeling drained or even betrayed if it lacks sincerity or depth. That's why they naturally gravitate toward the few who speak their language, both emotionally and intellectually. Carl Jung described it perfectly. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. For the intelligent, this is the ultimate goal, not to fill their lives with endless acquaintances, but to find the rare transformative connections that change them forever. Not interaction, but transformation. Many assume that solitude equals emotional detachment, but often the opposite is true. Intelligent people feel more, not less. Their emotions run deep, but instead of scattering them outward, they channel them inward into thought, creativity, and introspection. This is why so many great artists, writers, and philosophers have lived in partial isolation. Emily Dickinson, who wrote thousands of poems yet rarely left her home, Franz Kafka, whose inner world was so vast it spilled into literature that still haunts us today. These were not people avoiding life, they were engaging with it at a depth too intense for everyday conversation. And here's the realization: for the intelligent, solitude is not the absence of connection, it is the refinement of it. In solitude, they form profound relationships with ideas, with art, with memory, with visions of the future. They may appear alone in a quiet room, yet in their mind they are in conversation with Schopenhauer, with Jung, with the universe itself. And often, those internal dialogues are more nourishing than anything a dinner table can offer. This is also why their creativity thrives. Solitude acts as a crucible for originality, free from the filters of group opinion or social expectation. In that space, the mind can stretch beyond its limits, wandering into unexplored territory and returning with new perspectives. Albert Einstein once said, "The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind." He wasn't exaggerating, research confirms it. Solitude strengthens both divergent thinking, the ability to generate many possibilities, and convergent thinking, the ability to refine them into a clear solution. Together, they form the foundation of true innovation. But solitude is not without danger. Left unchecked, it can shift from sanctuary to prison. Intelligent minds, so rich with inner life, can also spiral into overthinking, melancholy, or alienation. This is why emotional intelligence becomes essential. True self-awareness is not just knowing your thoughts, it's understanding your emotions, your needs, and your limits. Even Schopenhauer wrestled with this. Though he embraced solitude, his writings reveal a man shadowed by bitterness and existential despair. This is the dark side of high intelligence, the ability to see, with unflinching clarity, the flaws of the world, the illusions of society, and the cruelty of fate. Without emotional grounding, such clarity can become unbearable. But when intelligence is paired with emotional wisdom, it transforms. It becomes a force not just for understanding the world, but for transcending it. So what kind of connection does the intelligent mind seek? Not entertainment, but resonance. Conversations where masks fall away, where honesty and curiosity meet vulnerability. Silence that feels natural, not tense. Relationships that respect their inner space instead of invading it. When they find this, whether in a person, a friendship, a partnership, or even in a piece of art, they come alive. This kind of connection feeds them more than 100 superficial interactions ever could. For many, the deepest sense of connection comes not in a crowded room, but while reading a book that puts their own unspoken feelings into words, or walking alone in nature, sensing the universe speak without sound, or creating something, a poem, a melody, a theory, that finally gives shape to what's been buried inside them for years. This is not rejection of humanity, it is a different way of relating to it, but it is also a harder path. The world is built for speed, distraction, and surface. Depth swims against the current. Intelligent individuals often choose reflection over reaction, meaning over popularity, solitude over noise, and in doing so, they discover something most never will: a profound inner freedom. Because once you stop seeking validation from the crowd, you become your own mirror. Once you stop fearing silence, you begin to hear your truest voice. Once you stop craving constant interaction, you start choosing intentional connection. Perhaps this is what Schopenhauer meant, not solitude as exile, but solitude as liberation. And in the final part of this journey, we will uncover the most powerful truth of all, the hidden reason why intelligent people not only prefer solitude, but need it, if they are to fulfill their deepest purpose. A revelation so profound it may change the way you see your own mind forever. Loneliness is not a void, it is the birthplace of greatness. And here, we arrive at the truth Schopenhauer hinted at but never fully said aloud. A truth woven not just through his words, but through the lives of history's most brilliant minds. For the highly intelligent, solitude is not simply a preference, it is the crucible of their purpose. Deep intelligence does not exist merely to analyze the world, it exists to transform it. And transformation, real, lasting transformation, cannot be born from noise. It is forged in stillness, in the quiet courage to face the inner world until knowledge hardens into wisdom. This, perhaps, is what Schopenhauer was truly pointing toward. To be intelligent is not merely to think more, but to feel deeper, to see sharper, and to carry the burden of consciousness that others escape through distraction. Solitude is where this burden is refined into insight. It is in the unobserved hours, when there are no roles to play and no masks to wear, that the intelligent mind stands bare before itself. And in that nakedness, something extraordinary happens. The chatter fades, illusions dissolve, and what remains is essence. And yet, here lies the paradox. The world craves the fruits of that essence: innovation, art, breakthroughs, but rarely understands the solitude that makes it possible. Society welcomes intelligence when it builds, but fears it when it questions, when it disrupts, when it reveals what many would rather not see. That is why so many great thinkers have walked alone. They are not here to protect illusions. They are here to pierce them. And piercing requires space. Space to think without manipulation, to feel without interruption, to imagine without ridicule. History is full of such examples. Jesus in the desert, Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, Newton in seclusion during the plague, Kafka writing in the silent hours, Beethoven, deaf and alone, composing his most immortal works. They were not empty in their solitude, they were becoming. And that is the final truth. For the intelligent soul, solitude is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of creation, a laboratory for ideas, a temple for truth, a sanctuary where the soul speaks in its real voice. Schopenhauer once wrote, "It is difficult to find happiness within oneself, but it is impossible to find it anywhere else." That is the revelation. Solitude is not loneliness, it is alignment. Withdrawal is not weakness, it is refinement. Distance from the world is not exile, it is the vantage point from which a new world can be imagined. But make no mistake, this path is not easy. It takes courage to decline invitations that drain your spirit. It takes strength to choose silence when the world tells you to distract yourself. It takes faith to believe your inner life is not a prison, but a portal. And above all, it takes wisdom to know that you are not broken for needing solitude. You are awake. Awake to the beauty only silence reveals. Awake to the truth only solitude can unlock. Awake to the calling only depth can answer. So the next time you find yourself craving quiet, withdrawing from noise, or choosing thought over talk, don't apologize. Honor it. Because in a world that constantly pulls you outward, choosing to go inward is one of the most revolutionary acts you can make. And now, I leave you with a question. What does solitude mean to you? Have your deepest insights, your most creative breakthroughs, your truest self emerged not in a crowd, but in a quiet moment alone? Share it in the comments. Your story may be the light someone else is searching for. If this message spoke to you, subscribe, like, and share it with someone walking their own silent path. Someone who needs to know they are not alone in their solitude, but part of a lineage of quiet brilliance stretching through centuries. Because in the end, it is often the quietest minds that leave the loudest legacies. And the world does not need more noise. It needs clarity. It needs courage. It needs those willing to walk alone so that others may one day find their way. Thank you for watching.